Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder three. Strange things that happen here, no stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.
Coffee. Without it, we would never have had the Industrial Revolution. We'd all be still living in Europe in mud huts. Here in Laredo, we have the Organic Man Coffee Trike. 4501 McPherson, the best coffee on the planet. If you can't get to Laredo, you can order from the Organic Man Coffee Trike.shop. And welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. A friend of mine, Daniel Jones, recorded the UFO conference so I can sit back and pretend like I'm there and watch the show. What is a ghost? Why do some people or things stay on long after they should be either in another world or rusting away in some junkyard? Ghosts seem to exist of just about everything we know of in our world. There are spirits that look like people who died long ago. People have seen ghost cats and dogs. In some locations, people report hearing hoofbeats as dozens and sometimes hundreds of mounted riders pass by. That would give you ghost horses. Last week, I talked about a few ghost airplanes seen mostly in locations of massive fighting during World War II. Is the ghost of an object simply a recording or a spectral memory of something that passed by long ago? Or could there be something else going on that we may never understand? In the 1970s, the area of Keimling, near Stockholm, Sweden. Don't you know it's going to be a word I can't pronounce, and it's going to be in here a lot. Keimling, near Stockholm, Sweden, was being developed as a suburb. A part of this involved building a metro line through the region called the Blue Line, as well as an above-ground metro station along it at Keimling. Construction began, and although the line was developed and built, passing from Stockholm to Akalla, the station in Keimling was left unfinished, partly because it was felt that urbanization around Stockholm had peaked, and partly because residents of the area wanted to preserve its natural beauty. The station was mostly finished, yet when the Blue Line was officially unveiled in 1977, it didn't stop in Keimling. The building sat empty and abandoned, maintained to the minimum, just in case the decision was ever made to open it up. Even with someone coming by once in a while to make sure the building wasn't leaking or falling down, it began to show its age. There it sat, derelict and forgotten, a feral place that had no purpose. People living around the unused station began to report seeing a train stopping at it from time to time. This train didn't look right. Something about it led people to believe that maybe it was something other than just a train. The Silver Pylon is a special model C5 metro train that was manufactured in the mid-60s. It was made of aluminum in order to make it lighter and therefore more efficient. For unknown reasons, the train was never painted the same green color as the rest of the metro fleet, and it was only used as a backup train. The train would run to the end of the line and then return, usually empty, never stopping at any stations since it wasn't picking up passengers, just dropping them off. People living close to the tracks would watch as this aluminum train went whisking by. They could see the cars were all empty. They also said the upper areas had held no advertising, which gave the train a very sterile look. Sightings of the silver train were rare, with many people going years between spotting it. Some people didn't even think it actually existed. In the 1980s, people began telling about seeing the silver train pulling to a stop at Keimling Station late at night. With time, the stories would go into a bit of detail on how the train would stop and it would pick somebody up and then pull away. No one knew who this late-night commuter was, and as far as they know, he was never seen again. People began daring each other to wait on the platform and board the ghost train should it stop. Others began saying the train would stop in the dead of night and people, those who had passed on, would disembark. The ghost train was carrying the dead and depositing them at the unused station. Once the passengers had gotten off, they would all fade from sight. Nothing was ever left to show they had been there except for the witnesses' stories. It was said that a mysterious spectral silver train, the Silver Pylon, which meant Silver Arrow, would pass through the countryside and stop at the abandoned station only once a year. The passengers on board were all the spirits of the dead, or they may have been zombies. Some said the train would come to a halt and wait for anyone brave enough, foolish enough, or maybe just dead to get on, and then it would pull away. It would take an entire year for it to return. A story began to circulate of some foolhardy person who had gotten on late one night. When he returned, an entire year had passed, yet to him it had only been a few hours. None of the other stations along the line ever had any of these stories of ghosts, spirits, or zombies, or even the misfortunate adventurer passing through. The silver train wasn't seen passing by or even stopping at any of the other stations. Only at Keimling Station, which also just happened to be the only unused station on that line. If I lived near the station, I wouldn't board the Silver Arrow. I'm not that brave or foolhardy yet. I would try something, though. First off, a camera mounted near the platform to hopefully catch a video of the Silver Arrow coming through. I'd also try putting together a case, something movable, with recorders and cameras pointed in all directions. If I was fortunate, or unfortunate enough to be at the station and the train stopped, I'd try to push the case onto the train without getting any part of my body through the doors. That would probably be the easy part. Now, the wait would be on, and you'd have to be lucky twice to be there a year later when the train came through and stopped once again. A pike pole, like what we used in the fire department, could be used to pull the case back off. No way would I stick any part of my body through the doorway, just in case. I have listeners in Sweden. I hope I didn't scare them off or upset them too much by the way I pronounced the name of the station. If you can catch any photos or videos of the train, or you manage to build that case full of electronic gear and pull this stunt off, let me know how it goes. This sort of thing is worth the effort. The trouble is, some folks will still say any videos are all CGI and the recordings were made in someone's basement. Just too bad for them. They've lost their sense of adventure and wonder. If it works out, or even if it doesn't, let me know how it went. In May 1908, a train passing through the night near Medicine Hat, Alberta in Canada had a run-in, or a near run-in, with another train. A man named Slosher was the fireman. That's the guy who shoveled coal into the firebox, working with an engineer named Tuhey. The train was about a mile or two outside of Medicine Hat when they saw a headlight coming towards them. This would be another train coming in their direction. Trouble is, they were on a single track. Ever watch the old Addams Family? Gomez would run two trains together. This was what was about to happen to Slosher and his engineer, along with their entire train. Things were happening fast, and neither man had the time to think, let alone act. The engineer laid on the horn, and they both prepared to meet their maker. If you've never come face to face with death, I don't recommend it. I was working in the oil field. We would haul drilling supplies. My job was to hook and unhook either equipment or pipe. They didn't let me drive. I just worked to the back of the truck. One night we had to pull a mud pump up onto the flatbed trailer. I was trying to hook the cable up when the truck slowly began rolling back. I didn't realize it was moving until I was pinned between the Mansfield bar and the pump. The truck weighed about 35,000 pounds. The pump weighed about 10,000. I was only 200 pounds at the time. I would have slowed things down, not at all. I couldn't move, and my hips were both pinned. I let rip with a mighty roar, or probably a scream. Guys came running from all over the rig to see who was making so much noise. They got the driver's attention, so he would step on the brakes and stop the truck from rolling back any farther. He pulled forward, and I fell straight to the ground. A couple guys grabbed me and kind of drugged me over to some place where I could sit. I used to smoke back then, but I couldn't get a cigarette lit due to my hands shaking so bad. One of them had to fire it up for me. The next day, both hips were dark blue. A good thing I didn't have to go, or I would have. Yeah, facing death is not recommended. Slosher says he and Tuhey were both frozen in place watching the light coming at them. At the last second, the other train seemed to move to the right. This couldn't happen since there's only the one track and it was being occupied by Slosher and his train. The engine went by, followed by several passenger cars. Both men stood and stared at the people in the car who were all staring back. The two trains were maybe a few feet apart. The passenger cars were lit up, and the faces all had shocked looks as they looked back at the engineer and the fireman. It looked as if they all knew there was no way the two trains could be passing each other. The entire incident was so much of a strain that Tuhey called in sick for the next few days. In an effort to get to the bottom of what had happened, the engineer consulted a fortune-teller. She told him the incident was a portent of his impending doom. The engineer put in a request, and he was assigned to work the yard for a while until he could get his nerves calmed back down. Meanwhile, Slosher was assigned to another train, this time working with an engineer named Nicholson. A few days and a few nights went by without any bizarre things happening. On the same track, in the same area, once again, a single bright headlight was seen coming at them. Once more, both Slosher and the engineer thought This is it. We're all gonna die. Yes, that's a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy reference. The train pulled to the right, and both men watched it go zipping by. The passengers all staring back at them as if they were seeing ghosts. Seeing this bizarre thing twice just about was too much for Schlosser to handle. Time moved on, and he managed to get his nerves under control. Late one afternoon, he was getting ready to take another trip out of town. Schlosser was building up steam in the engine when a report came in of a train crash. The Spokane Flyer and a Lethbridge passenger train had a head-on collision on a single track a mile or two outside of Medicine Hat at the exact spot where the ghost train had appeared. The Lethbridge locomotive had derailed and its baggage car was completely destroyed. 7 people were killed in the accident, including 2 engineers. One was Tuhey, and the other was Nicholson. Schlosser had somehow witnessed what was to come. He hadn't seen his own impending doom. He'd seen what was going to happen to both men that he was working with. This could be a ghost story, or it could be a time slip. The Lincoln Special was designated as the official presidential mode of transport, kind of like Air Force One is today. The U.S. Military Railroad had built the car and delivered it to the president in early 1865. Lincoln never rode in his official car while he was alive. After Lincoln was dead, the car was used to transport his body to his former home in Illinois, where he was to be buried. Lincoln's body lay in state at the White House and the rotunda of the Capitol building before being loaded into the rail car. The train had to be modified to transport Lincoln's coffin as well as the coffin of his young son Willie, who had died of typhoid fever in 1862. Willie had been buried at the Georgetown Oak Hill Cemetery, but after his father's assassination, his coffin was removed and placed aboard the funeral train. The procession left Washington April 21st, 1865, for a 12-day journey across the northern states, stopping for formal funeral ceremonies in 12 major cities. The smaller communities organized numerous other memorial services along the train's 1,600-mile route. When Lincoln's funeral train made its journey from Washington, D.C. to his final resting place in Illinois, every city and town along the route was lined by folks wishing to pay their last respects to the fallen president. Word would be spread by telegraph telling people how far the train was from their location. A runner would go through town telling anyone and everyone that the train should be there at a certain time. Everyone stood with their hats in hand and bowed to pray as the train passed. The engine was covered in American flags with black toppers, and the car itself was draped in black silk ribbons and bunting. Seeing the train hauling Lincoln go by would be a memorable occasion. There was no TV or radio to distract people. Knowing the train was coming, people would have stopped what they were doing, actually put on their best suits or dresses, and waited on the side of the tracks. For years after this memorial event, people were still reporting seeing the same train pass by on April 14th. Not the date of the train's original passing, but the date of Lincoln's death. People living or working along the train tracks have said they would hear the train whistle announcing its coming. Looking up to watch, people did things like that back then. The train would come chugging along, only this train was white and translucent. September 6, 1879, the Wichita Herald published an article called "It Was a Phantom Train," telling the story that a writer had been given during an interview with a night switchman who had formerly been employed with the Hudson River Railroad. Now keep in mind, people talked kind of funny back then, so I'll try to do my best to sound authentic. The witness said, "I have seen the Phantom Train. I have seen the Phantom Train more than once. I'm out of service now, but 10 years ago and for many years before that, I was a switchman on the Hudson River Railroad. I'm retired now. It was April 1864 that President Lincoln's body was brought over our road. I did not see the train, and I was no great reader of the newspapers. I saw no description of it. I want you to remember this. Just 1 year after the funeral train passed over the road, I saw its ghost. I was at my post waiting for the midnight express, which was due at 12:30 in the morning. I had read the assassination and knew that President Lincoln's body was sent west, but I was sick in bed when the train passed my station, and I didn't see it. It was the night of April 14th, 1866, as far as I can remember, that I first saw it. It was a phantom train. I was at my switch station and had a good while to wait before the next regular train was due. I was about to retire into my little house when I heard a sullen rumbling sound that gave me warning of the approach of a train. I was expecting a freight train that night, which was to leave half a dozen cars on the side track, and the noise I heard seemed to me to be coming from that train. Knowing that there were no regular trains on the road at that hour, except freights, the midnight express had passed before I heard the phantom train. I fixed the track accordingly. The switch was set so the train would run up it and detach such cars as was designated to leave. While I arranged the first switch, the rumbling in the distance became louder and louder, and I knew that the train was not far away. I had posted myself at the upper end of the siding in order to make no more delay than was absolutely necessary. Just as I had completed my arrangements, I heard a sullen roar made up of thousands of different noises blended together. Looking down the road, I saw a headlight whose power and intensity I had never seen equaled in my experience of 30 years. There was a chill about the air that I couldn't understand. I saw rushing along the main track with reckless speed a locomotive draped from one end to the other in crape and carrying at least a dozen little flags, also shrouded in crape, and on her side rails. I could read her name as she passed me by. It was the Constitution, and I could see 3 men as plainly as I see you. One had his hand on the lever and was peering out into the night as if in search of something on the tracks. Another was shoveling coal into the furnace and making a deal of noise about it. The third was dressed all in black, with crape dangling from his arm and encircling his stiff high hat. He sat upon a stool, doing nothing. Back then, morticians used to wear top hats with black ribbons wrapped around where the hat band would be. You ask me how I saw so much in so short a time. I can't explain it. All I know is that I saw what I'm telling you. There was something ghastly in the faces of the men, but that might have been caused by the terrific rate at which they were speeding along. As soon as the Constitution had passed, I ran to the lower end of the siding to fix the switch, which I feared somebody had tampered with. It was just as I had left it. While I was puzzling my head over the mysterious engine, a second headlight threw its reflection upon me, and I saw another black-draped locomotive. It was not going as fast as the first, but making what we used to call express time, say 35 or 40 miles an hour. I could scarcely see any of the iron and steelwork of the engine, so thoroughly was it covered with crepe, ribbons, and black cloth. The handrail was hidden from sight by masses of crepe, as was also the steam chest, and in front of the boiler was a heavy fold of black cloth. Even the smokestack had streamers of fleecy crepe, and 10 little national flags that ornamented the handrail were shrouded in the same material. Just below the window of the cab I saw a portrait framed in wood, as black as ebony. It was that of the martyred president. I could see the faces of the engineer and the brakeman, and several passengers who were seated near windows, whose black curtains were raised. They all looked pale and ghostly, but those who moved at all moved naturally and transacted their business in just about the same way that any other train hands would. I expected to see her turn off upon the siding, but she didn't turn. Instead, she kept right along on the main track as though there were no such switches in the world. The cars followed her as easily as though the going was clear, and in a few seconds all that I could see of the train was the lamp of the flagman on the rear car. The train that was carrying Abraham Lincoln and his son had been accompanied by a second shorter train that was carrying dignitaries and workers. Other men working for the railroad have reported nearly the same sighting. A train all decked out in black ribbons and buntings, flags with black ribbons tied at the tops. The trains would pass by ignoring any switches that had been set to guide the train onto a siding. Once the ghost train passed by, railway men had reported that their watches had lost up to 8 minutes. The night switchman stated in his eyewitness account he could not explain how he saw so many details as the speeding locomotive passed by. Once again, if I lived in the area, I'd be out there with my camera on April 14th, waiting and watching to see if I could get a sighting of the ghost train. Too many people have lost their sense of wonder about the unexplained, and they just don't do things like that. They would much rather sit at home and watch somebody else do it on TV. Come on, if you've got a camera, you live near the train tracks, and it's April 14th, see what happens. Along the old Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, in and around the small town of Republic, is the site of one of Ohio's first documented hauntings. A ghost train repeatedly travels the ill-fated route of a fatal disaster that occurred more than a century ago. The disaster on the Baltimore-Ohio Rail near Republic, Ohio, took place a little after 2 o'clock on the evening of January 10, 1887. It was caused by a freight train traveling along the tracks at the same time that a passenger express was scheduled to be there. Having just one track in many locations was the driving force behind getting every part of the United States on the same time frame. In order to schedule trains to go both directions, they all had to be on the same time. Even with time zones, you still knew what time it was, your turn to run along the tracks. A freight train left Tifton eastbound at 1 o'clock in the morning. It was sidetracked in Scipio to allow the eastbound express to pass, then proceeded towards the Republic Station. It was expected to reach before the arrival of the fast express from the opposite direction. I made a small error there earlier. I said it was in the evening. It was in the morning, not in the evening. The fast express from the east was due at Republic at 2 a.m. The distance was only 5 miles. The weather was intensely cold. The official story was that the engineer and the foreman either neglected or did not understand what they were doing because they could barely keep up steam in the locomotive. The railroad didn't want to say that maybe the men were having trouble with the engine, which would have been their fault. A half-mile west of Republic, an engine stopped entirely. The conductor did make a fatal mistake. It was his duty to send a signal to the front, "Lo más pronto posible," or as fast as he could. For unknown reasons, he waited. Once the train had come to a dead stop, and finally he got off the train with a lantern and started forward. At this point along the tracks is a sharp curve, and the conductor had not gone more than the length of 20 cars when he saw the headlights of an approaching express rounding the curve no more than 600 feet away and coming at about 60 miles an hour. The conductor began waving his light to alert the coming train of the impending disaster. The engineer of the express hit the brakes, and the train took forever to slow down. The faster a train is moving, the longer distance it needs to stop. A steam train could reverse direction even while moving, but... Okay, who's knocking things over? One of my cats is over there destroying the den. Chance. Okay, now he stopped. A steam train could reverse direction even while moving, but steel on steel makes for some slippery stuff. The engineer threw the train into reverse, but he could see the stopping train was coming fast. With no way of stopping, he yelled to the firemen to follow, and he jumped. The engineer was lucky, and he landed in a snowdrift, which helped him from breaking anything. He lay there in the snow and watched as his train slammed into the freighter. The firemen didn't make it. Both engines were lifted off the tracks. The following cars were derailed and flipped. Bits and pieces went in every direction. Train cars were mostly wood back then, and the fire from both boilers caught everything ablaze. There was nobody around to put out the flames, and no way to even try. There was no definite record of how many people were on the express. The bodies were so badly mangled and burned they were unidentifiable. Some bodies were so torn up it was difficult to tell what went with whom. It was a mess, and there was no way to fix it until the townspeople arrived to see what they could do. From the time of the head-on collision, people have reported seeing a train go flying by in the dark, usually at about 2 o'clock in the morning. People say they see the headlight of the passing train, even when there is no train on the tracks at the time. What makes it most eerie is the lack of any sound. Just a speeding light or an all blacked-out train passing in the dark. Railroad workers have seen a train passing by on the anniversary of the accident as well. They report seeing a red light being swung back and forth as if the conductor is still trying to stop the oncoming express train. One night on the anniversary of the collision, a train was traveling along the tracks when the engineer saw a red light ahead. The light was swinging back and forth as if the holder were in a panic. The engineer hit the brakes and the train slid to a stop. The crew got down and looked for the person holding the red light. There was no one there and no sign of anyone around. The engineer discovered he had stopped right where the collision had taken place over 100 years previous. People also report seeing a man dressed an old-style train conductor walking along the tracks waving a red lantern. Ghost trains sound kind of ominous. Now, how about another form of mass transit? Today, if you're traveling in Mexico, the roads and the highways aren't all that bad. You still have to watch for drug cartels who will set up a checkpoint to charge you a fee to drive on a public road. You also need to watch out for army units manned by kids who don't really understand what flagging someone means. I've looked into quite a few rifle barrels in my time while traveling through Mexico. Between the city of Toluca and a town of Ixtapan, there's a highway that makes the journey rather quick and easy. It wasn't always like this. Years ago, anyone that traveled was forced to drive along a dangerous and winding mountain road. On one side of the narrow road were steep vertical rocks, and the other was a sheer drop-off. One evening, years ago, a bus departed Ixtapan, making the journey to Toluca. It was an overnight trip, so the passengers on the bus took the opportunity to get some much-needed sleep. When the bus reached the base of the mountain, it had started to climb. It also began to rain. Most of these passengers had made this trip many times, and they didn't think anything of it. As the bus reached the highest point on the mountain, the rain got somewhat more intense. The driver negotiating the dangerous curve as the road descended. Some very serious accidents had occurred on this stretch of road, and many of them had been fatal. As the bus began to descend in the heavy rain, the passengers became a little nervous when they realized that the bus was picking up speed. This is not how it should be done. Folks began calling to the driver, saying that maybe he should slow down a bit. The driver was doing his best, only to find that the brakes were out. Soon, the bus was traveling at a really bad rate of speed. As they came to a curve, the driver swerved, losing traction. The bus skidded off the cliff, and it plunged into the void. It tumbled down the rock slope and smashed into the jagged rocks below. Many of the passengers were killed instantly in the crash. Others lay unconscious, bleeding in the wreckage. The bus caught fire, and soon it was completely engulfed in flames. Those unlucky enough to have survived the crash died in the fire. Later that night, the police located the site of the crash, and they called for rescue units to come, but it was too late. There were no survivors. The bodies of some passengers lay strewn about on the sharp rocks, and the bodies of others were charred inside the smoking wreckage. Ever since that day, people have reported seeing the old bus traveling late at night on the road from Ixtapan to Toluca. They say, if you hold out your hand, the bus will stop for you. Once the doors open, you're allowed to get inside. Those who report about seeing this bus say it looks in good condition. In fact, it looks brand new. The story goes that if you get in and sit down, you're going to feel strange emptiness in the pit of your stomach. Something is very wrong with this bus. Despite the late hour, nobody on the bus seems to be asleep. All the men, women, and children just sit there wide awake, staring straight ahead. Nobody is talking, and nobody is doing anything else, just sitting there, staring. The story goes that the bus conductor will walk down the aisle checking for tickets. If you try to pay for your ticket, the conductor will pass you by. The bus makes the trip without any problems, arriving late at night in Toluca. The driver will stop blocks before the bus terminal. He will turn to you and say, "You have to get off." Even though the journey's not finished, you better get off of that bus. As the new passenger gets up and walks towards the exit, nobody moves. No one looks at him. They all just sit there staring straight ahead. As the passenger passes the driver, if he attempts to pay for his ticket, the driver will also refuse, waving away your money. He will say, "There is no charge. Go now and don't look back, or you will never leave this bus." Those who obey, who do not look back, hear the sound of the door close and the bus engine as it drives away. Those who don't listen and turn around and look will see what appears to be a burned-out hulk of a wreck sitting on the side of the street. Inside are nothing but skeletons sitting in all of the seats. They're sitting up and staring straight ahead. The bus will disappear, and you will die in an accident a few days later. It is said from that moment on, your ghost will be stuck sitting in the bus. So, if you happen to be traveling in Ixtapan, and one day you decide to take a bus to Toluca late at night, there's a chance that you just might get to ride this bus. If you do, make sure you do what the driver tells you to do. Otherwise, you're liable to make that trip for the rest of eternity. In West London, folks report seeing a phantom bus which has been blamed in several traffic accidents. From what I've read while doing research, England is a very haunted place. They've had some wild events in the past that have led to spirits of all manners of beings or things to wander the countryside. Parts of England are also associated with magic and mysticism. Over the years, a lot of battles were fought over who should be the king or the queen. Families killed each other off at an unheard of pace. In Cambridge Gardens, eyewitnesses report seeing a double-decker bus painted bright red moving about the streets. Well, this isn't anything unusual. There are lots of red buses in London. What makes this red bus odd is when people see it, it exudes a feeling of fear and terror. The first written account of the ghost bus is from 1934. The witness saw a car driving along the street. The red bus came from around a corner. As it was getting close to the car, the bus driver swerved, forcing the car to hit a pole. Once the car was destroyed, the bus faded from sight. The only thing to differentiate it was the number 7 on the front and the side. 1 second it was there, and the next it was gone. The driver of the car was killed in the accident. The police report didn't say anything about a ghost bus causing the accident. It just said a red bus. From then on, people, mostly driving in automobiles, would see this red bus as it got closer to the driver, and any passengers would be overcome with fear. The stories of the phantom double-decker bus began to come from people who regularly rode the bus in London. Standing on a street corner, waiting for your daily transport, you might not feel so comfortable seeing a red bus coming. Soon, theories began to arise of what just might happen if you got on this particular bus. Most people go about their daily routine without actually thinking about what they're doing. Standing on a corner waiting for your ride, a bus pulls up and you get on. Pay the fare and go have a seat. I was brought up to thank the driver for doing his job. Plunk a quarter in the slot and then go sit. I'm not sure if it was a quarter, it might have been a dime, back in 1960s. U.S. buses had the entrance right next to the driver. In London, some buses had the entrance all the way at the rear, or on occasion in the middle. You wouldn't see the driver unless you went and sat right behind him. Just about everyone who saw the phantom double-decker bus became overwhelmed with fear. This may have saved their lives, since no one would knowingly board such a vehicle. Then again, we don't know, since those who did get on have never come back to tell us. As more people came forward to tell about seeing the bus, people began saying that the bus, as it pulled up alongside them, didn't have a driver. They would say that the driver's compartment was empty and it looked as if the bus was driving itself. The bus would pull away at a high speed. The witnesses all said it would cross the center line into oncoming traffic. The phantom bus would intentionally pull in front of cars coming towards it. The driver of any other vehicle would be startled to see a huge bus in their lane, and they would swerve to avoid hitting it. On a few occasions, these evasive maneuvers led to crashes with other cars or posts and other objects on the sidewalk. As soon as the damage was done, the bus would vanish. One victim of a crash caused by the bus was lucky enough to survive. He was taken to the police station. His story went, "I turned around the corner and I saw the bus moving. The headlights were shining, both floors were lit up, and there was no one inside. Neither the driver nor the passengers. I turned the steering wheel and drove out onto the sidewalk and slightly hooked on the fence. The bus immediately disappeared." Any driver giving such an account to the police would be suspected of driving while under the influence. Breathalyzers would be brought in. Many cops I've known have seen and heard things that they couldn't explain. Taking an official statement involving damage to public and private property, no one is willing to risk their career saying that a ghost caused an accident. The driver or the witnesses must have been mistaken, even when the guys in blue know better. That's just how it is. Over the years, not just dozens of people, but hundreds of witnesses have reported seeing the number 7 phantom red bus in London. The logo of the well-known company was drawn on number 7 bus, a double-decker painted red. When so many accidents had been reported, the company changed its name and logo so that people would no longer have any suspicions about their bus causing the accident. They say they did this to upgrade their buses, but I kind of suspect maybe they did it to let people know that number 7 bus is not theirs. The ghost was appearing in the same place all the time. This intersection where the sightings occurred was already known to be dangerous, and with the addition of the speeding ghost bus, it became even more terrifying. The testimonies of all the witnesses continued to be the same. The bus had no driver or passengers. The brand and the color of the bus were the same, and they could see the number 7 on the front and the sides. Also, the time of the appearance of the ghost almost always coincided. The phantom bus usually appeared at 1:15 in the morning, and it would always disappear without a trace. The only evidence to suggest the driverless bus made an appearance were the accidents that continued to occur. Because of all these casualties and the widespread rumors, the police simply couldn't explain it or ignore it. A detailed interrogation of all witnesses would end in the same mystery. They found out that locals saw this ghost on the road and even at the depot. After a few minutes, it would simply disappear. This phenomenon was observed by so many people, so it could not be attributed to insanity, drinking, drug use, or hallucinations of the witnesses. Residents of the area nicknamed the ghost bus the Night Knight. K-N-I-G-H-T. Night. Oh, come on. Give it a name like the Phantom Bus or the Bus of Death. Night Night sounds like something you'd say to the kids at bedtime. The residents of the area began to claim that the ghost bus was choosing its victims deliberately. Also, London authorities were never able to gather any hard evidence of the mystery bus that was causing panic among drivers. They decided to improve the visibility of the intersection between St. Mark's Road and Cambridge Garden by widening the road a few feet. In addition, it was decided to repair the road in the mystical place. Soon after that, the bus stopped appearing and the number of deaths decreased. Still to this day, many drivers try to avoid this haunted road, especially around 1 o'clock in the morning. July 1999, bus 777 with 48 passengers headed out from Phoenix, Arizona, en route to Laughlin. The driver took U.S. Highway 93 and headed north. After a brief stop in Wickenburg, they continued on, but they were having bus troubles as they went. The bus was overheating when they stopped in Wickiup, and the driver told the passengers that a replacement bus should be with them in a few hours. The passengers were eager to get where they were going, and they didn't much care for the long, hot time on the side of the road. They encouraged the driver to see if he could get the bus a little farther along. If nothing else, wind coming in the windows would be better than the hot air sitting still. They made it up to Union Pass before the bus just completely quit. Not a town, just the name of a spot in the mountains. It was downhill from there, and once again, sitting still would have been much too hot. The driver let off the brakes, and the bus coasted down the road. A witness who saw all of this said the bus was going a bit too fast. It rounded a curve and vanished. As the witness arrived at the curve, he couldn't see the bus anywhere on the road ahead. Fearing the worst, he contacted the police. There was no sign of the bus running off the road and no indication of any crash. The next stop on the bus's route was called, and they said the bus hadn't arrived yet. This got the authorities to search the area where the bus had been seen last. Nothing to show what had become of the bus and its passengers. It never arrived at its destination, and none of the passengers have ever turned up. For years after Bus 777 disappeared, people driving along Highway 93 have reported seeing a phantom bus near Union Pass. The witnesses tell how they were driving along late at night when a bus would come up from behind. It would get too close, shining its headlights into the vehicle. Then it would be gone. So far, no one has found the missing bus or any of the people who were on it. Marshall, Texas. We drive through there once in a while, either heading to Jefferson or to Virginia. Lots of huge pine trees. Outside town, you'll find a few dirt roads heading to either ranches or out-of-the-way places. One of these roads used to be the old Stagecoach Road. Built in the 1800s, the road was the only way to get from Marshall to Shreveport, Louisiana, and from there on to New Orleans. Before it was used for coach traffic, the Caddo Indians used this trail to get from place to place. Regular stage service was established in 1850 with 3 weekly arrivals and departures from Marshall. The arrival of the stagecoach was a big event. The coach drivers would sound a bugle, and the townspeople would rush out to meet the oncoming coach. This was also when any mail would arrive and any small supplies ordered for the local stores. Before Texans were putting this stretch of road to use, the legends tell of the Caddo Indians who used to travel the road, and they had seen some unexplainable things. A stagecoach road was used during the Civil War despite the shortage of drivers and horses. Things and people still needed to go from one place to another. With years of use, the road was sunk deep into the ground. In places, the banks are over a person's head. After the war and the completion of the Southern Pacific Rail line, this kind of ended the coach road use. Locals and thrill seekers alike have dubbed the road to be haunted. There have been several unexplainable things seen while traveling along this road. People have encountered ghosts of unknown people, shapes that wisp along and vanish. Cryptids have been seen here as well. Bigfoot, who's been seen around Caddo Lake, which is just 15 miles northeast of here, has also been seen along the Stagecoach Road. People say they will hear the clattering hoofbeats of horses, and then they will see a spectral stagecoach drawn by 4 black horses as it comes tearing along the road. Other people say it's not a stagecoach, but a hearse drawn by horses. The coach is seen both day and night, but the hearse is only reported late at night. Others have reported seeing strange lights when traveling the road at night. Many believe the unidentified lights are the lanterns hanging from a funeral coach as it rushes down the road in the dead of night, seeking souls to take back to hell. The story goes those who see the funeral coach are doomed to die, while those who hear it should drop to their knees and pray that the coach doesn't appear to them as well. Other bizarre encounters have been reported on an old bridge that runs across Stagecoach Road. Locals say if you park on the road and kill your engine, and you sit there and you wait for about 10 minutes, you'll find handprints all over your vehicle. No movement, just prints. The East Texas Bigfoot has been spotted along Stagecoach Road. The blood-sucking chupacabras and even the goat man has been reported lurking in the shadows by drivers as well. Other creatures that have been reported on Stagecoach Road include vampires and zombies, or at least the bodies of dead people moving about. They say that all along Stagecoach Road, bodies were buried for years. Nobody knows who all these people were or where all they might be. The oldest and perhaps most widespread tale regarding Stagecoach Road in Marshall is that of La Llorona. If you're not familiar with the story of La Llorona, the weeping woman, as she wanders along the edges of canals and rivers crying for her missing children. The reason they're missing is she killed them by drowning them in the water. Way back when she'd had the hots for a local cavalryman, she thought he was going to become her boyfriend and husband. She also thought that because she had 3 children from a previous marriage, maybe the cavalryman wouldn't want her. So, in desperation, she took her 3 kids down to the river and killed them. Once the dirty deed had been done, she discovered that this soldier had no interest in her whatsoever. In a last act of desperation, La Llorona went down to the river and killed herself. And from then on, she has been condemned to wander the edges of rivers and canals all over the place looking for her children. Also, if you see La Llorona, you don't want her to see you. Because if she does see you, the stories go that she will follow you, trying to get you to help her look for her kids, and the next thing you know, you'll have La Llorona outside your house forever. People have also seen the woman in white. They say that she was either a nurse working for the Confederate Army, or perhaps just some woman who was traveling along the road late at night in one of the stages when there was a bad accident. Apparently she was killed and maybe buried on the side of the stagecoach road, and she still wanders up and down the road at night. The Axeman has also been seen by people on the road. Many residents of the area talk about the Axeman's ghost, who is said to chop off the heads of those traveling alone at night. Other local lore regarding the road suggests that the bodies of countless unknown have been buried just off the beaten path. In the dead of night, unclaimed bodies were transported to the area around Stagecoach Road for burial. This was so the spirits would not haunt the living in town. All the times we drove through, only stopping for gas, now I want to drive to Marshall and spend a couple of days or even a week looking around. Something to keep in mind. When in Rome, don't upset the senators. I hope this show was up to standards. I did my best once more, but my best might not be all that good. And Chance had to go and put in his 2 cents worth by tearing up some bags that were sitting in the corner. I would go back and edit it out, but that's an awful lot of work, and sometimes whenever I try to edit things, I wind up erasing the entire show. If you have a subject you'd like to hear about, you can contact me at strangethings@arkanasa.com. Until next Saturday, this is Chris James for Strange Things.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man, the same murder 3? Strange things that happen here, no stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.